steady presence a calming force in the aftermath of the chaos. But then, the low rumble of engines returned. Clara looked up, her brows furrowing, while Ethan's sharp gaze turned toward the door. The bikers were back, but this time, they weren't laughing or swaggering. They dismayed. We didn't know, he stammered, glancing nervously at his crew. Ethan's calm response. The bikers hesitated before stepping back into the shop, their earlier swagger now completely gone. The leader approached Ethan cautiously, his head bowed slightly in what could almost be mistaken for respect, or fear. "Look, man," he said, his voice shaky, "we didn't know who you were. We were just messing around. We didn't mean anything by it." Ethan's piercing gaze locked onto the man, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing, letting the weight of the silence bear down on them. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Does it matter who I am?" Ethan asked, his tone cutting through the room like a blade. "You don't treat people the way you treated my mother. You don't intimidate or bully because you think you can get away with it." The leader nodded quickly, his eyes darting to the floor. "You're right. We were out of line. We're sorry." A shaky apology. The other bikers echoed the sentiment, mumbling apologies as they avoided eye contact. Even the wiry man with the scar, who had been one of the most vocal earlier, managed a quiet, "Yeah, sorry about all that." Ethan crossed his arms, his expression softening slightly but still carrying an air of authority. "You owe her the apology," he said, nodding toward Clara. The leader turned to Clara, his voice quieter now. "Ma'am, we're sorry for what we did. We shouldn't have treated you like that." Clara, ever the composed businesswoman, studied the bikers for a moment before nodding. "Apology accepted," she said, her tone firm. "But don't let me catch you near this shop again unless you're here to buy something, and treat it with respect." A humbling lesson. The bikers shuffled out of the shop, their heads low and their pride in tatters. As they mounted their motorcycles, one of them muttered, "We really picked the wrong guy to mess with." Harold, still standing outside, chuckled as he watched them ride off. "Damn right you did." Clara's pride. Inside the shop, Clara looked at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and pride. "Well, I'd say you made quite the impression," she said, her voice tinged with humor. Ethan shrugged, his demeanor humble as always. "Just did what needed to be done." Clara smiled, placing a hand on his arm. "You've always had a way of reminding people what respect really means." As the shop returned to its usual quiet, Clara and Ethan shared a moment of understanding. The bikers had learned a lesson they wouldn't forget, and Blue Haven's quiet strength, embodied in a Navy SEAL turned fisherman, was more evident than ever. As the sound of the bikers' roaring motorcycles faded into the distance, the shop settled into an almost eerie quiet. Clara continued tidying up the mess left behind, the scrape of crates and the soft slosh of melting ice the only sounds filling the air. Ethan stood near the counter, his strong, their motorcycles roaring to life as they sped away. Clara's quiet pride. As the door swung shut, Clara exhaled, a mixture of relief and pride washing over her. "Well," she said, stepping out from behind the counter, "that was something." Ethan turned to her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You okay, Mom?" Clara nodded, her eyes shining with admiration. "Thanks to you. You handled that better than anyone else could have." Ethan glanced around the shop, taking in the scattered mess. "I'll clean this up." But Clara shook her head, placing a hand on his arm. "No, Ethan. You've done enough. You reminded those men, and everyone else, that this town doesn't back down to bullies." As the shop settled back into silence, Ethan knew the bikers had learned a lesson they wouldn't forget. What they had mistaken for weakness was strength in its purest form, a strength they had underestimated at their own peril. The shop was finally quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional squawk of a seagull outside. The chaos had been replaced by a heavy, almost stunned silence. Clara began to tidy up the mess left behind, but her focus kept shifting to her son, who was standing near the counter, his presence still commanding. As the bikers lingered outside, regrouping and nursing their bruises, the tension hung in the air. Their bravado had been shattered, but their pride kept them from leaving just yet. One of the bikers, the wiry man with the scar, glanced back through the window, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. The bystander speaks. It was then that an elderly man, a local resident who had witnessed the entire altercation from outside, stepped forward. His name was Harold, a retired Navy officer who had spent decades in service. Though his steps were slow and deliberate, his voice carried weight. "Hey!" Harold called out to the bikers, his sharp gaze fixed on them. "Do you boys have any idea who you just tangled with?" The bikers exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier arrogance now replaced with unease. The leader, rubbing his sore wrist, sneered. "Yeah? Who's he supposed to be, some fisherman hero?" Harold chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "That fisherman hero is Ethan Hayes. Decorated Navy SEAL. Served this country with more honor than you lot will ever know." Shock and realization. The name hit the bikers like a punch to the gut. The leader froze, his bravado crumbling as the truth dawned on him. "Wait. Navy SEAL," he muttered, his voice faltering. Harold nodded, his tone growing firmer. "That's right. He's done more in a day than you've done in your lives. You're lucky he went easy on you." One of the younger bikers, the one who had been waving the lobster earlier, blanched. "No way," he whispered, his eyes darting back to Ethan, who remained calm and quiet, watching the exchange from inside the shop. The leader's sneer was gone, replaced by an expression of unease. "Size doesn't matter when you don't know what you're doing." Chaos unfolds. The other bikers hesitated for a moment, clearly taken aback. But their pride wouldn't let them back down. Two of them charged at Ethan simultaneously, one swinging a fist while the other grabbed a nearby crate as a weapon. Ethan reacted instantly. He sidestepped the punch, grabbing the first biker's arm and redirecting his momentum into the second attacker. The two collided with a thud, collapsing into a heap of crates. Before they could recover, Ethan had disarmed the second man, kicking the crate out of his grasp and sending it skidding across the floor. The shop erupted into chaos as the remaining bikers joined the fray, but Ethan remained calm, his SEAL training kicking in. He moved with precision, using minimal effort to deflect their attacks. A quick sweep of the leg sent one biker sprawling, while a well-placed palm strike disarmed another who had picked up a crowbar. A stunning display. The leader, furious and humiliated, grabbed a chain from his belt and swung it at Ethan. The chain whipped through the air, but Ethan ducked beneath it, stepping into the leader's space and grabbing his arm. With a swift twist, he disarmed the man and sent the chain clattering to the floor. Ethan didn't stop there. He used the leader's momentum to pin him against the counter, his forearm pressing firmly but not aggressively against the man's chest. "Still think you're in charge here?" Ethan asked, his voice steady. The leader struggled but couldn't break free. "Who the hell are you?" he spat. Ethan leaned in slightly, his expression calm but deadly serious. "Someone you should have thought twice about messing with." A humiliating defeat. Within minutes, the bikers were subdued, their earlier arrogance replaced with shock and humiliation. The shop was a mess of overturned crates and scattered seafood, but Ethan remained unscathed, his composure unbroken. The leader slumped against the counter, rubbing his wrist where Ethan had twisted it. "This guy's crazy," he muttered to his crew, who were nursing bruises and cuts. One of the older bikers, still on the floor, muttered, "This guy's more than crazy, he's trained." Ethan straightened, surveying the room with a calm yet intimidating gaze. "You're lucky this didn't end worse," he said. "Now get out. And if I ever see you near my mother's shop again, you won't get off this easy." The bikers scrambled to their feet, their earlier bravado completely gone. The leader hesitated for a moment, glaring at Ethan, but one look at his crew, bruised and beaten, was enough to convince him to retreat. Without another word, they shuffled out of the shop. Ethan's expression remained neutral as he walked closer, his movements deliberate. I'm someone who doesn't take kindly to bullies, he said simply, his tone steady but carrying an edge of warning. The SEAL's presence. The leader scoffed, trying to mask his unease. What, you think you can take us on? There's 6 of us and 1 of you, pal. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile, but his eyes remained cold. You might want to think about that math again. One of the younger bikers, emboldened by the leader's bravado, stepped forward. What's your problem, man? We're just having some fun. Why don't you mind your own business? Ethan's gaze shifted to the younger man, his expression unflinching. You made it my business when you messed with my mom. The room grew tense, the bikers exchanging uneasy glances. Despite their numbers, something about Ethan's presence made them hesitate. He wasn't yelling or threatening, he didn't need to. The quiet confidence in his voice and the way he carried himself spoke volumes. The warning. Ethan stopped a few feet from the leader. She knew what Ethan was capable of, and she trusted him to handle the situation. What the bikers didn't realize was that their intimidation tactics were about to backfire spectacularly. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Blue Haven as Ethan made his way back to his mother's seafood shop, carrying a bucket of fresh bait from the docks. He had planned to spend the rest of the day helping Clara organize the day's catch, but as he approached, something felt off. The shop, usually filled with the gentle hum of locals chatting, was eerily tense. The low rumble of motorcycles parked out front caught his eye, their gleaming chrome standing out against the quaint, rustic backdrop of the town. Ethan's steps slowed as he heard raised voices coming from inside. Assessing the scene. Ethan stepped quietly to the window, peering through the glass. Inside, his mother stood firm behind the counter, her shoulders squared, facing down a group of 6 leather-clad bikers. They loomed over her, laughing and mocking, their presence a sharp disruption to the shop's usual peace. His sharp eyes quickly scanned the room. The leader, a burly man with a skull tattoo on his neck, was leaning on the counter, smirking as he spoke to Clara in a low, condescending tone. Another biker was waving a lobster around like a trophy, while a third was kicking over a crate of fish, scattering it across the floor. Clara's defiant posture told him all he needed to know. She wasn't backing down, but the situation was escalating. Ethan's military instincts kicked in. Years as a Navy SEAL had taught him to observe, strategize, and act with precision. He noted the bikers' positions, their body language, and the exits. He calculated the risks and planned his approach. A quiet entrance. Without making a sound, Ethan slipped into the shop, the bell above the door jangling softly. The bikers didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in their harassment of Clara. Ethan stayed near the back, leaning casually against a wall, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing inside him. He watched as the leader reached across the counter and grabbed Clara's arm. "Come on, lady," the man said with a sneer. "We're just having a little fun. No need to be so uptight." Clara yanked her arm away, her voice sharp. "I said enough. Get out of my shop." The leader chuckled, turning to his crew. "Feisty, isn't she? Too bad there's no one here to back her up." "That's where you're wrong," Ethan said, his voice calm but carrying a quiet authority that immediately caught everyone's attention. The shop fell silent as all eyes turned toward him. Ethan stepped out of the shadows, his tall, muscular frame exuding confidence and control. His piercing gaze swept over the bikers, lingering just long enough to make each of them uncomfortable. The leader straightened, sizing Ethan up. "And who the hell are you?" he asked, his voice laced with irritation. "This is my shop, and I won't tolerate disrespect. You're not welcome here. Leave." The leader chuckled, his grin widening. "You hear that, boys? She thinks she's the boss of us." Another biker, the wiry one with the scar, picked up a fish from the display and dangled it mockingly. "What are you gonna do if we don't, huh? Call the cops?" Clara's expression didn't waver. "If you keep this up, I won't have to. The people in this town look out for each other, and they won't stand for your behavior." The bikers escalate. Her words seemed to amuse the group even more. The younger biker with the shaved head grabbed a lobster from the tank and waved it around like a trophy. "Check it out, boys. Dinner's on me tonight," he shouted, laughing as the lobster flailed its claws. "Put it back," Clara said firmly, her voice cutting through the laughter. "That's a living creature, not a joke." The leader's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered, leaning closer to Clara. "You're feisty, I'll give you that," he said. "But you've got no idea who you're dealing with." Another biker kicked over a crate of fish, scattering it across the floor. "Oops," he said with a grin. "Guess we made a mess. Hope you don't mind cleaning up." Clara's resolve. Clara stepped out from behind the counter, her eyes blazing. "Enough," she said, her voice rising slightly. "This shop is my life's work. I put everything into it, and I'm not about to let a bunch of bullies ruin it. Either treat this place with respect or get out." Her defiance drew a momentary silence from the group. The bikers exchanged glances, a few of them shifting uncomfortably under her fiery gaze. But the leader, unwilling to lose face in front of his crew, smirked again and crossed his arms. "You're brave, I'll give you that," he said. "But bravery doesn't mean much when you're outnumbered." Ethan's silent watch. From the back of the shop, Ethan watched the scene unfold, his expression calm but his fists clenched at his sides. He admired his mother's courage, but he could see that the bikers weren't going to back down easily. Their behavior was escalating, and it was only a matter of time before things turned dangerous. Ethan's military training had taught him to wait for the right moment to act, but his patience was wearing thin. When one of the bikers grabbed Clara's arm again, roughly pulling her aside, Ethan decided he had seen enough. The shop fell silent as Ethan stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Let her go," he said, his voice low and steady. The leader turned to face him, clearly irritated. "And who are you supposed to be? Her bodyguard?" Ethan's eyes locked onto the leader's, his expression unflinching. "Just someone who doesn't take kindly to disrespect. You've been warned." The bikers laughed, their arrogance unshaken. But Clara, despite her fear, looked at her son with quiet confidence. He kicked over a wooden crate, sending fish scattering across the floor. "You should thank us for livening it up." Clara's face tightened, but she refused to back down. "I won't ask again. Either treat this shop with respect or get out." The leader leaned on the counter, grinning. "And what if we don't? What are you gonna do about it?" Ethan observes. From his position near the back of the shop, Ethan silently watched the scene unfold. His sharp eyes took in every detail, the bikers' aggressive posturing, the way they tried to intimidate his mother, and the escalating disrespect they were showing to her livelihood. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't move just yet. His SEAL training had taught him the importance of patience and assessment before taking action. He knew the situation could turn dangerous if handled poorly, and he wanted to give the bikers every opportunity to leave peacefully. But when one of them grabbed Clara's arm, the line was crossed. The final straw. "Hey, old lady," the leader said, gripping Clara's wrist. "Maybe you should show a little gratitude. We're your customers, after all." Clara yanked her arm away, her voice firm. "That's enough. Leave. Now." The shop fell silent for a moment as the tension reached its peak. The bikers exchanged glances, clearly enjoying their display of dominance. The leader smirked, turning toward the others. "Looks like we've got ourselves a feisty one. What do you say, boys? Should we stick around?" Before anyone could respond, a deep, calm voice broke through the tension. "I think it's time you left." The bikers turned to see Ethan standing at the back of the shop, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. Though he hadn't raised his voice, there was a quiet authority in his tone that instantly caught their attention. The leader narrowed his eyes, sizing Ethan up. "And who are you supposed to be? The big bad fisherman?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Just someone who doesn't appreciate bullies." The stage was set. The bikers had no idea they were about to face a man whose quiet strength came from years of elite military training. The confrontation was far from over, and Ethan was ready for whatever came next. The air in the shop was thick with tension, the bikers' mocking laughter and heavy footsteps filling the once peaceful space. Despite the chaos, Clara stood her ground behind the counter, her posture straight and her gaze unwavering. At 68 years old, she had faced her share of challenges running a business, but nothing quite like this. Yet, she refused to let a group of troublemakers bully her into submission. A calm but firm response. The leader of the bikers leaned over the counter, his imposing figure towering over Clara. "You've got a lot of guts, lady," he sneered. "Most people would have backed down by now." Clara didn't flinch. "And most people know how to act in a place of business," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "After everything you've done, you deserve it." Ethan didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said he appreciated her words. He had never been one to talk about his time in the military, preferring to let his actions speak for themselves. A day that would change everything. The peaceful morning at Clara's shop seemed like any other, a routine day in the heart of Blue Haven. But neither Ethan nor Clara could have predicted how quickly things would change. The arrival of an unexpected group would soon disrupt their tranquil lives, testing Ethan's resolve and reminding everyone in Blue Haven that sometimes, heroes emerge in the most unexpected ways. The peaceful rhythm of the morning at Clara's shop was abruptly shattered by the roar of motorcycle engines. The sound echoed down the quiet streets of Blue Haven, causing heads to turn as a group of bikers rolled into town. Their arrival was jarring, the aggressive growl of their bikes a stark contrast to the calm ambience of the small coastal community. Clara glanced up from the counter, her brows knitting together in concern. "What's all that racket?" she murmured, stepping toward the shop's front window. Ethan, stacking crates of ice near the back, straightened and walked over to join her. The bikers parked their motorcycles haphazardly in front of the shop, their laughter and loud voices carrying through the glass. There were 6 of them, all clad in leather jackets adorned with patches and chains. They radiated arrogance and a disregard for the quiet town they had just invaded. The invasion of the shop. The bell above the door jingled as the bikers pushed their way into the shop, their heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. The largest of them, a burly man with a thick beard and a tattoo of a skull on his neck, led the group. He surveyed the shop with an exaggerated sneer. "Smells like fish in here," he said loudly, wrinkling his nose. The others laughed, their mocking voices filling the small space. Clara stepped out from behind the counter, her voice calm but firm. "If you're here to buy something, I'm happy to help. If not, I'll have to ask you to leave." The leader chuckled, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. "Feisty for an old lady," he said, glancing at the others. "What do you think, boys? Should we buy something?" Another biker, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, picked up a crab from the display and held it up mockingly. "How much for this little guy? Bet he'd make a nice pet." Clara held her ground. "That's fresh seafood, not a toy. Put it back." Mockery and disruption. The bikers continued to laugh and roam the shop, deliberately knocking over displays and jostling the carefully arranged crates. One of them spilled a bag of ice onto the floor, while another ran his fingers along the glass counter, smearing it with grease. "This place is a dump," said a younger biker with a shaved head. Steady presence, a calming force in the aftermath of the chaos. But then, the low rumble of engines returned. Clara looked up, her brows furrowing, while Ethan's sharp gaze turned toward the door. The bikers were back, but this time, they weren't laughing or swaggering. They dismounted their bikes with an air of hesitancy and filed back into the shop, heads bowed and hands shoved into their pockets. The apology. The leader, his bravado completely gone, stepped forward first. His earlier smirk was replaced by a sheepish expression, his eyes avoiding Ethan's. "Look," he began, his voice quiet but sincere. "We messed up. Big time. We disrespected you, your mom, and this place. We shouldn't have done that. The others nodded in agreement, each mumbling their own apologies. Even the wiry biker with the scar muttered, "We're sorry," his tone filled with regret. Ethan's piercing gaze softened slightly, though his stance remained firm. He nodded toward Clara. "Your apology doesn't mean much unless she accepts it." The leader turned to Clara, his shoulders slumping. "Ma'am, we're really sorry for what we did. You didn't deserve that." "None of it." Clara studied them for a moment, her arms crossed. She could see the genuine remorse in their expressions, and her innate kindness guided her response. "Apology accepted," she said firmly. "But respect is earned, not taken for granted. I hope you'll think about that before pulling something like this again." Ethan's lesson. The leader turned back to Ethan, his voice hesitant. "Thanks for not, completely breaking us. You could've, and I get that now." Ethan stepped closer, his calm but commanding presence making them listen. "You're right. I could have handled this differently. But I chose not to, because real strength isn't about hurting people or proving you're the toughest guy in the room. It's about knowing when to stand up for what's right and when to let things go." He let his words sink in before continuing. "You didn't just disrespect my mom. You disrespected yourselves. Treating people with kindness and respect doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger than you realize." The bikers nodded, their earlier arrogance completely gone. The leader extended a hand to Ethan. "We'll do better," he said simply. Ethan hesitated for a moment before shaking his hand firmly. "See that you do." As the bikers left for the second time, their motorcycles rumbling away down the quiet streets, the shop felt lighter. Clara sighed, shaking her head as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. "I'll say this, you've always had a way with words." Ethan chuckled softly, his expression warm as he helped her lift a fallen crate. "You taught me most of them, Mom." They worked side by side to clean the shop, the rhythm of their movements soothing after the earlier tension. Finally, as the sun began to set over Blue Haven, they sat on the shop's front steps, watching the golden light dance on the water. Clara said, breaking the comfortable silence, "this town's lucky to have you." Ethan looked out at the horizon, his voice quiet but sure. "I'm the lucky one, Mom. This is where I'm meant to be." Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. In that moment, they didn't need words to express what they both felt. Together, they had faced adversity with strength and grace, standing up for what was right and reminding others of the power of respect and humility. As the waves lapped against the shore and the town settled into its peaceful evening rhythm, they knew they had made a difference, not just for the bikers, but for the community they called home.